welcome back to another episode of the Paranormal Journals, only here on Black Mass Paranormal. Now, if you are new to the channel, please, I ask you to hit that subscribe button, definitely give this video a like, and let me know what you thought in the comments. So, if you have been on this channel for a while, you know that I have a vast interest in what happens in the national parks in Appalachia. Mainly the Smoky Mountains. The Smoky Mountains are a park that I've been running through my entire life, and I absolutely love this place. However, in the mountains of Appalachia, there are stories of things that happen that can never be explained. We have people going missing and nobody ever finding any trace of them whatsoever. We have stories of people being attacked by ghosts, goblins, or cryptids living within the mountains of Appalachia. Now, all over the internet nowadays, they talk about how dangerous the mountains of Appalachia really can be. And on this channel, I like to go out and I like to explore those dangerous areas and bring you, the viewer, a first-hand look on these different interactions that happen within the Smoky Mountain National Park. Now, recently I had an individual who reached out to me whose name was Marc. Him and his new fiance, Alyssa, decided that they were going to go into the southeastern side of the Smoky Mountain National Park and do a little bit of tent camping. However, what they encountered during this camping trip was something that they never expected. Now, you hear a lot on TikTok and YouTube about the Appalachian people closing their blinds at night if you hear your name, no you didn't, and all kinds of strange things that happen and these rules to live by in the Appalachians. Now, some of them are bullshit. Some of them, I mean, there's no doubt that's a human footprint. I've got movement over here.
Plays. All right, you ready?
Yeah.
Are you running?
Yep. Yeah.
Want to do it one more time?
Yeah.
Ready?
It sounds like the metal clanking
There you go.
and it ran like a...
Are pretty real. So Marc and Alyssa were from Knoxville, my home. They decided that they were going to go camping in the southeastern side of the Smoky Mountains, and they had an encounter that they will never forget. Now, Marc said that he's always claimed to be a skeptic of the paranormal. He claims that the things that happen can generally be explained by, simple environmental factors or local animals. So he kind of didn't take to some of the warnings that were happening along their trip. Over the years in the Smokies, people have reported strange howls, strange figures, and disappearances that happen that are never solved. So Marc and Alyssa are in their late 20s, and they had been to the Smokies a dozen times before. So they didn't really have any skepticism on the dangers that could happen in this section of the park. Now, you all have heard me talk about this section of the park many times. It's kind of right there on that border between Tennessee and North Carolina. That's where all of the locals, the moonshiners, anybody knows that that's the area that you need to be careful of. They had initially planned on doing a 6-mile hike through the Smokies and to camp 2 different nights. And on that 6 mile, they were required to carry everything that they needed on their backs. Their tents, their sleeping bags, their food, and their cooking supplies. Now, Alyssa, like many Appalachians, are prideful of their cast iron skillet sets. And this particular choice was an extremely good one for Alyssa. Now, by the evening, they had found a secluded little area that was right near a creek. And Marc talked about the absolute beautiful sunset that they were able to watch going over the mountains. They were able to see why they call it the Smoky Mountains, because there was this kind of dense fog that came down over the mountain and in to their campsite next to the creek. And once they got there, they got started doing what a normal hiker does. They began pitching their tent, they began setting up their cooking area and getting some firewood. That way they could start a small little fire next to the creek. But Marc said as the night kind of came in, the feeling in the forest began to change. He described the kind of environment as actual like skeletons in the woods, as the branches kind of moved and created this really intimidating environment. So they decided that they were going to leave their fire going overnight to just kind of maybe keep away the bears, to keep away any local wildlife, and to just kind of ease some of the nervousness that they had that night. Even though Marc said the first night was a little bit creepy and he kind of felt like the mood had changed, the first night went pretty easily and was basically just silent. The next day, they got up, they made breakfast, they did their thing. They didn't really have any issues. Although Marc stated that he did notice what seemed to be possible bear prints near the area. Now, Marc and Alyssa were relatively experienced about dealing with bears in the Smoky Mountains. The Smoky Mountain National Park is actually one of the #1 rated places in the United States to have a bear sighting. And with the recent developments that are happening throughout the Smoky Mountains, the bears are seemingly pushing down from the mountain and having a little bit more interactions with people, making them a little bit less afraid. Now, Marc knew this and still kind of kept an eye out for bears, but it wasn't a deal breaker. And as he looked around the campsite the next morning, he saw what he believed to be bear prints. Now, they weren't definitive or anything, but he said that it just seemed like there was a pad that was kind of pushed into the ground that looked similar to a bear, but maybe not a bear. So they move on from the campsite. They're moving through. They're going on their next adventure. They have a full day of hiking ahead of them. And as they are making it down the trail, Marc and Alyssa both claim that they started to experience that feeling you get when people are watching you or when something is watching you. Now, Marc said he initially picked up on it and didn't want to startle Alyssa. He said they were just going to continue on their trip, keep hiking, and look at the beautiful views and be excited about where they were at. A couple hours later, Alyssa decides that she's actually going to confront Marc about this situation. Now, eventually, Alyssa said because she didn't want to startle Marc. She said, "Hey, Marc, what is the possibility of a bear actually following us?" At that point, Marc knew that Alyssa had the same feeling that he did. Marc addresses it, says, this is the Smoky Mountain National Park. There is a good chance for us to run into a bear, and it very likely could just be a curious bear that's getting prepared for winter. And just kind of tried to calm down the situation and put everything behind them, because at this point they were not in a location to where they could just stop. They had to make it to their next campsite. Now, as they started to get closer to the campsite, they began picking up on some other clues. Initially, Marc heard what he thought was a breath. Now, the deer in this area and the elk make a sort of kind of grunting noise sometimes that people will mistake for something else. When the elk do it, it can be a little bit more intimidating. It's pretty loud, it's pretty disturbing, and initially when they heard the sound, Marc tried to calm Alyssa's nerves by telling her that it was an elk, although they didn't see an elk. However, this deep huff breath made Alyssa very nervous. They made it to their next camp, and as they kind of started to set things up for the night, they were kind of uneasy at this point. After the first campsite, they noticed these strange prints in the ground, and then as they were walking along the trail, they heard a loud kind of huff sound. Now, Marc also described another sound that he initially attributed to a squirrel, and he said that he wished he would have paid a little bit closer attention to it because it was the clicking sound. Now, squirrels do make some sort of kind of clicking noise a lot of the times, and and for the majority of these experiences, they can explain that. However, Marc said that this noise was louder and a little bit more deliberate than a squirrel makes. I've talked about this on a couple times on the channel. When you are going to have an encounter with the feral people, you typically will hear one of two things. One being a clicking sound or a more kind of robotic bird type of chirp. It's a very odd sound. The bird sound hasn't really made it to the really widespread acceptance of feral people descriptions, but it's something that I have personally experienced multiple times. It's a very forced bird call that you hear, and what I believe it to be is the feral people actually communicating to each other between the clicks and the kind of robotic bird sound. So as they are setting up the camp for the evening, Marc decides that he wants to do a perimeter check. So he will know if anything kind of comes into their campsite, at least the next morning, because they still have a little while to hike to get out to their meetup point where their friend is going to pick them up. So Marc gets out, he starts walking around the kind of campsite, and at this time he recognizes a distinct figure out in the wilderness. Now, as the sunlight is setting, you can kind of see the shadows a little bit more deliberately as they are kind of moving at that certain time. If you're a mountain person, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Right before the sun sets, it's like the shadows get bigger. And that's exactly what Marc experienced. And Marc recognized also that the human torso is not a shape that you see typically in nature, unless there's a human there. So Marc sees this thing and tries to kind of calm his nerves, but at this point they're kind of stuck. It's getting dark. He's just now seeing these figures. He's still hearing that kind of clicking sound, the random brush moving in the woods, and Alyssa hits her breaking point when she hears a loud stick break. Something very as simple as that. And it happens to me when I'm out on the trail. You will be out. It seems like everything is silent and everything is quiet. And then you will hear just a snap. And that snap, when you are out in the mountains, and whether you're alone or with somebody else, will scare the living crap out of you. And once Alyssa heard this final snap, she was terrified. She was absolutely terrified, she said. But Marc said that he did a good perimeter check around the campsite and that he intentionally took several sticks and positioned them in a way that if somebody were to come into this campsite, it's most likely they're going to kind of trip over these sticks or break them so they would hear it. So as the sun goes down, Marc and Alyssa get in their tent. They zip it all up nice and tight, and Alyssa has a little bit of trouble falling asleep, and so does Marc. So Marc gets up, gets his flashlight out, and decides he's going to look around camp one more time to see if that shadowy figure out in the mountains could possibly still be there. So Marc takes his flashlight, he shines it through the forest. He doesn't see anything. The forest is quiet, and he lays back down. As he gets back in the tent, about 10 to 15 minutes later, he notices that Alyssa is asleep. Now, because of the bears, the park encourages you to either put your food in a bag and store it up in a tree so it's off the ground, or put it in a place where it's not easily accessed by the bears, because a lot of times a black bear will just come into your campsite, grab something, and carry it off. So Marc, although uneasy, lays down and eventually starts to fall asleep. Now Alyssa was pretty scared, and one of her pieces of equipment that she just had to carry was a cast iron skillet. Now, typically on hiking trips, a cast iron skillet is probably not a good idea to carry because they're extremely heavy. But every Appalachian has a set that they are proud of that was probably their grandmother's cast iron skillet. This one right here was my granny's from back in the day. I take great pride in this thing. As you can see there, it has a great seasoning on it. You barely have to put any oil to cook with this thing. I'm so excited about it still. So Alyssa goes to sleep with a smaller, mind you, probably about this size, cast iron skillet next to her, just in case she's got to whip some ass. About 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning rolls around, and at this point the forest is like dead quiet. All the animals have basically calmed down for the night. All they can hear is crickets throughout the forest. So around 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, when everything is just quiet, they hear a loud thud. And Marc and Alyssa both wake up at the same time, and Alyssa is absolutely terrified, and she's like clutching her cast iron pan at this point. And Marc says that because he hears more rustling, it sounds like a bear had knocked off the rope that was holding their food in the air, or what they heard was the food that hit the ground. So Marc's pretty set on this is a black bear. It's making too much noise. It's not, gonna be anything too terrifying, but he is still scared because he's about to have a face-to-face encounter with a black bear that once it runs out of their food that they had left outside, it's going to be coming in the tent. So Marc decides he's going to get up and try to scare the bear away. Marc and Alyssa hear the food hit the ground, and then they hear more kind of rustling. So at that point, Marc and Alyssa think that there is a black bear outside. So Marc grabs his boots, puts them on. He's kind of in a hurry, but not really, because he's about to, try to scare off a black bear. And Marc grabs his knife and his flashlight, and Alyssa has her flashlight as she's still laying down in the tent. So Marc reaches down, he grabs the zipper, he unzips the tent, and as he's doing that, Alyssa brings the flashlight kind of in front of Marc's face so he can't see very well. His eyes are dilated now to that flashlight, and Alyssa's shining it out in the forest. Now Marc, as his vision starts to come back, he sees again that big shadowy figure. Now Alyssa doesn't see it, but at this point Marc does. So Marc initially steps out of the tent thinking it's a black bear, brings his flashlight up, and as his eyes start to adjust and Marc is shining the flashlight out in the forest, he sees a man standing about 20 feet away from him. Now Marc initially describes this man as having like longer than normal arms. That was one of his big takeaways. But Marc says that this individual has got like this full like beard that is just scraggly, and it looks like half of it's been torn out. He's looking at this person's eyes, and he says that the center of their eyes is like white, that he can't really get a good look at it, and because he just woke up, he's a little bit kind of confused. And as he's looking at this thing, Alyssa gets up and she's shining her light. At this point, Alyssa starts screaming. Instead of causing this feral person to run, it causes this feral person to attack. So Marc is now throwing blows with what this he thinks is a man just out in the middle of the Smoky Mountains. Marc described this man as having longer than normal arms, that he was hairier than the average man. He was completely bare-chested. He had some sort of covering over his legs, or over his groin kind of area. And Marc and this feral person are just fighting till eventually the feral person gets on top of Marc and has now bitten down on Marc. Alyssa at this point realizes that Marc is losing this battle. Marc described the feral person as being so strong that he's never experienced anything like this in his life. That this feral person just grabs a hold of him and just absolutely slams him on the ground and starts to bite him. And Alyssa jumps up. She sees Marc and that is in a bad situation, and if Marc dies, then she's 100% next. She comes flying out of the tent with her cast iron pan and starts hitting this thing. Luckily, at that point, Alyssa, the feral person, separates from Marc and starts to kind of jump off. They both describe it as kind of like ape-like, the way that it moves away from them. This thing is just kind of like hopping almost, kind of away.